Welcome back to the hustle. Welcome back to the grind. Look right down there. The roads are deteriorating at an alarming rate. So what's going on? It's actually election day coming up very, very soon in the US. Canada, it's late fall next year. And let's talk about it. I don't want to get into the politics of who you should or shouldn't vote. That's everybody's personal choice and decisions based on your own priorities. But what I've seen is in Canada, things have deteriorated in most regards. Long wait lines in hospitals, extensive wait lines, quite frankly, and a lot of people, elective surgeries getting pushed off, and even people waiting for surgeries for cancer treatments. And I know, because even when my mother was going through what she was dealing with, we had heard, she met people, and a lot of them were waiting a long time. There's people that weren't even surviving the date because they had to wait for 2 years to get a procedure done. But everybody has their own objectives of what they'd like to see out of the politicians. And realistically, every agenda has something in it for everybody. Otherwise, everybody would vote one way or the other. Well, guess what? US, there's a big election coming up right around the corner. And again, it's going to be really come down to a matter of priority. What does each one of the, participants speak to you? What are their priorities? What are their attitudes? Do they look viable? Do they look reliable? Do they look trustworthy? Because ultimately, how that impacts you and I is a lot bigger than you believe. They say if you don't have a voice, you don't have power. So if you're not speaking on ballot day, then it's one of those things that you sort of just accept, the status quo. And if status quo is fine for some people, it literally is. So if that works for you, that's great. But what I've realized is we're seeing such polarizing moments these days in politics that it's no longer that down the middle, well, they both have good traits, so this is a tough one. I think whether you're speaking about the US or you're speaking in Canada or any other place in the globe, it feels like it's a much more polarizing conversation these days. Some of the very attitudes and some of the policies that these government, policymakers are coming out with, taxation. I could speak in Canada. I would say in the last handful of years, we've seen such drastic changes in policies, taxes. There's been exclusions, or there's been inclusion rates have been changed to the point where, they're including more taxes. There's less exemptions. Tax rates are climbing in most cases. Income tax, it's not uncommon. The average Canadian these days is paying, between 40 and 50% tax. And that's before you get into anything else. And we hear about all this all the time, and, how much people are paying in taxes. That's your income tax, your provincial and federal income tax. US, same thing. They all have, their own tax, programs too. But realistically, it's the taxes that, in a lot of cases, make or break prosperity. The more you're taxed, ideally, you're getting more on the back end through, social programs, ideally. But it doesn't seem to be always working out that way, because the idea behind that is increased taxes. Ideally, you're going to see better roads, schools, spending to keep infrastructure going. You're going to see better healthcare system. You're going to see, whatever the government decides to put down as a priority, ideally, you're going to see, hopefully that translate to real world function and things that you can put your hands on and feel and that are tangible. But as somebody that's, like myself, for example, and a lot of you out there who are watching right now that are in a similar situation, whether you're retired and you're relying on investments, or you're relying on, you're running a little business or side hustle, or maybe you're building sheds, garden sheds like that, and you're selling them on the weekend just to make an extra buck, in retirement, just to top up your wages. All of these factors they're all changing before our very eyes. The government, at least in Canada, US, there's some changes. It seems like it's pretty heavy in Canada right now, where a a lot of the corporate taxation programs and systems are changing slightly, slowly, removing loopholes, both even on personal income tax as well as corporate taxes. You know, there's less loopholes available. They're closing those doors. They are clearly making it tighter and harder to conduct business and make it profitable. You know, a lot of people are moving, they say they move down to the States because that's one of the more capitalist environments. And, you know, there's opportunities to have your small business or medium-sized business thrive down there. But not everybody is in a place where they want to move and, you know, uproot themselves. And especially if you're retired, you know, somebody that's maybe been, you know, worked all your life, you've worked 35, 40 years, you're tired, you've got grandkids, and all of these things, you've got deep roots where you're at. Not everybody wants to uplift and move to the US or Europe. You know, there's some hot spots right now, they say in Europe too, or, you know, in Asia and Thailand and these different places that people are moving and they're experimenting with, because the taxation systems here in Canada, somewhat in the US, are pushing people out. They're driving people that are trying to make a buck or trying to get ahead. They're pushing them out. They literally, when you're making, you know, when you're paying a 40-50% tax right off the top, then you're paying other things like carbon tax on fueling. There's, you know, the fuel, they say the fuel at the pump, probably 20-25% of that is actual product. The rest is taxes, at least here in Canada. Then, of course, you're paying, you know, property taxes, which are going up. All kinds of other levies and taxes that, you know, you're going to pay, whether it's, you know, for, you know, GSTs on anything you're buying, you know, or VAT or GST, other taxes that you're buying on things with your post earnings already. So your income tax, you're paying more on goodies with your after-tax earnings. So you've got less and less and less. By the time it's all said and done, if you're your average consumer, you know, that, you know, makes an average to middle upper level wage in, say, Canada, and you're consuming like most people do, you know, where you're just buying goods and groceries and spending your, you know, $300, $400, $500 a week on groceries, and you're buying your insurance, paying for your insurance, utilities, and you buy a car every 5-6 years. All of those things that the average consumer are doing in Canada, you've probably realistically got 30% of your paycheck in your pocket to play with. And the more these taxes keep hitting us, the harder it becomes. But again, where this all ties in is, you know, if you're retired or you're a small business owner or you're trying to run a side hustle, all of these extra taxes just keep hitting and hurting the bottom line. And so it's very important that we continue to educate ourselves, not just on how to manage our money through life, you know, through your 20s. And I talk about this all the time, but through your 20s and your 30s and your 40s, don't waste that time. Don't waste that time. Double down, work hard while you're young, while you have a chance. When there's opportunities, jump on it. Don't waste those chances. Don't waste those opportunities. Make hay when the sun shines, because when you're young, that's your best opportunity. You have the energy. But be educated, be informed as to what politicians are representing, what priorities for you. I mean, we could be in a position where if the politician of your choice addresses some of the key issues that you have, and they hit that and they're into power and they start implementing some of these changes, that could be beneficial to you. Of course, it goes the other way, and you continue down this spiral of despair. We see the homelessness constantly everywhere. I've never seen, it's tragic, really. I've never seen this level of homelessness ever. I mean, I think anybody can comment. You doesn't matter where you go, U.S. cities, Canadian cities. It's just at an alarming rate. Look what's going on in San Francisco. Tragic. Well, that's kind of what we're seeing here in Vancouver and Toronto. They're getting pretty bad there too for that type of crime and homelessness. It's just not a good spot for a lot of people right now. Now, of course, it's not all about government and government policies. A lot of it is post-pandemic and some of the things and some of the mental health challenges that people had during that time. poverty. A lot of people were driven into poverty, and just the whole idea of locking people in, just whether you agreed with it or not, that's not even about the conversation, but it did have an impact on people's state of mental health. And so ideally understanding what the policies of that respective political party represents is going to have a huge impact on, the next 4 years, 8 years, maybe. I mean, in Canada, they can run for 100 years in a row if they, if they're so inclined, if they're, we see right now, I think the current power right now in Canada, I think they're on year 9 or year 10 here going on. In the US, I think you're good for 2 consecutive terms. That's it. And then you're done. But realistically, you've got to understand, you've got to be informed, because when this comes, and it's coming, do you want to have your issues addressed? I mean, we also notice that when certain politicians get in, or there's a hint that certain politicians might get into power, or they become more popular in the polls, you see things in stock prices change. And when that starts to happen, that's also where it starts to hit the bottom line. I mean, most people have investments. A lot of people are doing other things like, stock exchange and trading stocks and doing all that jazz, trying to make a buck, day trading or investments. And a big part of that is your portfolio for your retirement. I mean, a lot of that is the very financial means that a lot of people have to live in retirement time. And so if you're seeing these stock prices nosedive on some big investments, that volatility can absolutely weigh down on the success of your retirement. It's sad, but it literally hinges on your investments in a lot of cases. And so the bottom line with this is you've really got to be informed, because you get the right power in there, you get the right leader in there, and things can certainly go down the path you want. We know that healthcare is a big one. As people age, healthcare, everybody needs healthcare at some point, but as you age, you need it a lot more than a younger person. So obviously, priorities for older people and retirees and pensioners are going to be huge. You want to make sure that the healthcare system is there. You want to make sure that, things like Medicare are always addressed. And if they start retracting on those things or not addressing the obvious shortcomings or gaps in those areas, that's worrisome, because we pay a lot of money during the years in our taxes. You hope that some of these factors are looked at. It's the bottom line is there's so many complex discussions as to politics, and it's so polarizing. And I definitely don't want to raise the anger and the animosity that's already existing, because it's such a polarizing conversation right now in politics. That's not the intent. I don't even want to go there. I do want to say, though, with this elections coming down, looming, you have to get on board. You have to do your research. You have to get out there and vote. And it's so critically important that we do so. Here's one for you. Did you realize the Canadian government, a lot of you probably are somewhat informed on this, Canadians largely, that every 4 years there is an election to be held, a federal election. I believe it's the 3rd week in October, every 4 years. The same date, every 4 years. It's stamped. It's stamped in concrete, basically almost like that right there. See, that's as stamped as it becomes. But would you believe there's a whole pile of MPs in government that are at risk of getting potentially voted out? And so what the government in power did was the pension qualification date to be able to get your pension in government, the government officials, these MPs, are qualifying, unfortunately, a week after. That puts them at their anniversary date for qualifying, many of them for qualifying for their government pensions. But that's a week after the next election, a week after. And we know that there's a lot of talk and we're not here to talk about who I think is going to win, but there's a risk that if the governing power does not get in again, and they lose a week before that anniversary date, they all lose those pensions. So what do? They go and they amend a bill currently to extend that date and advance that date to vet their pensions a week earlier. So regardless of what happens on voting day, they've got their pensions vested a week earlier, just before the election day. I don't know how that sits with any of you. Now, again, this isn't really about which party you believe in, but conceptually, I know there's people on both sides of the scale, on both sides of the spectrum, or actually all major parties. Of course, we got the Liberals right now, Conservatives, the NDP, and the Bloc basically are the major parties. And from what I understand is there are representations on all parties pretty much that are at risk of losing that pension if they don't advance that date. But suffice it to say, that just feels, it just feels, I don't know. You know what? Drop a line down below. Let me know how that makes you feel to hear that kind of thing going on in politics. But most importantly, just get out there, vote for what you think is right, but make sure you do your research. Be well educated, because remember, as you retire, politics plays a bigger factor. I hate politics with an unbridled passion, and I never used to follow politics. But I find as you age, you have more skin in the game, you earn money, you have property taxes, you worry about healthcare, family, all these things, they become more relevant. And as they become more relevant as you age, it matters more. So again, it's gross even following politics, but you do have to inform yourself a little bit as to some of the major policies, because if you ignore it, you could find yourself in not a great spot realistically, because you may wind up with a party that is doing things that go against your grain. So anyway, I'd love to hear from each and every one of you. Please do drop a line, and I hope to see each and every one of you real soon. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.